Hi guys, I just wanted to do a short video today giving a sort of a general overview of Hood's famous counterattack the morning of September 17th, 1862 at Antietam. And to do that, we're going to have to hit fast forward on the first hour of fighting. So I'll give you sort of a thumbnail sketch so you can understand what's happening at the battle right now. Right now I am oriented looking south. Behind me is the famous cornfield owned by David Miller. The field I'm standing in, this meadow, also owned by David Miller. He was a farmer and one of the many farmers who was unfortunate to have one of the worst battles of the war move into his property. Now, like I said, I'm looking south. The Hagerstown Turnpike and the West Woods are to my right. The East Woods are off to my left. And straight ahead, you can see where that spire monument is in that building. That is the Antietam Visitors Center. And as you can tell, it sits on a little plateau. That plateau, the morning of the battle, was a Confederate artillery platform who were shooting at the Union soldiers advancing south through the corn and this meadow. To the right, now you can't quite see it because it's obscured by foliage, but you see that modern house dead ahead? Just to the right there, just where the trees are hiding it, is the famous Dunker Church. And this plateau and the church are the Union aiming point for their assault as they advance down the axis of the Hagerstown Turnpike. And the general goal is to get possession of that high ground, because if you can drive the Confederates off it, they can implant their own artillery on it and more or less blast the rest of the rebel line into pieces. So what's happened the first hour? Well, back and forth fighting through the cornfield, through this meadow, charge and countercharge, brigades meeting and fighting and wrecking each other and being replaced by other ones who do the same. Pardon me while I flick a bug off me. Okay. But at this point, about 7 a.m., we've reached, this is the tip of the Union advance. They have driven the Confederates from the field. They have, in fact, just wrecked the last Confederate counterattack. And we're standing at the approximate position of the 6th and 2nd Wisconsin, the 2nd United States Sharpshooters, and they're backed up by some men from New York. Off to the left here, there is another brigade commanded by, well, its original commander turned and ran, frankly, but it's now commanded by Colonel Peter Lyle. They are off to our left. And like I said, they are the tip of the Union spear that's driving hard for that plateau. The Confederate guns there are starting to think about getting out because they can see the Union infantry coming. But what happens? Well, a few minutes after 7, like I said, this is the Hagerstown Turnpike. Right where that line of corn is now runs a road called the Smoketown Road, and they come to an apex with they intersect right about there. And there's a gap in the fences there. Coming out of the woods, on the run in column, comes Confederate reinforcements. This is Stonewall Jackson, who has command of the field, this part of the field, playing his trump card. His last reserve, John Bell Hood's division. And that's a bad thing for the Union soldiers, because Hood's division are the elite, if you will, of the Army of Northern Virginia. And they are extra motivated by rage today because they had not had anything to eat the last 3 days ago. They had been issued half a ration of beef and some green corn. Then they march many miles to try and help save the day at the Battle of South Mountain, and they eat that food on the march, and they've had nothing for 2 days. In fact, they were positioned roughly here the night of September 16th, but Hood goes to Jackson and says his men are so exhausted, hungry, that he asks to have them replaced so they can try and draw rations. Jackson agrees. Hood's men are deposited in the woods there. The commissary wagons finally appear at dawn. And unfortunately, the only thing they bring with them is flour. But making do as best they can. Hood's men make some dough with the flour and some water. And they're cooking it over campfires. They're essentially going to have fire-cooked dough. But it's certainly better than nothing. Unfortunately, the dough is not quite done yet. When the order comes to stop cooking, grab your muskets. You are needed on the field of battle. And as one Texan said, I never saw a group of men so disgusted as when that order came. Some of them managed to hurriedly choke down some of the half-cooked dough. And now, always fearsome fighters, but extra furious right now. They come out of the woods, like I said, where the Smoketown Road meets the Hagerstown Turnpike, and they unreel into a battle line that stretches from the turnpike across the field, the whole way across the field. And they fire a volley that a Union officer right around where I'm standing describes as it was like someone ran a scythe through the line, so many men go down. And then they raise the most terrifying rebel yell anyone on the field had ever heard, and they come charging straight at where we're standing now. And the Union soldiers have been fighting for a while now. They're tired, and seeing this coming at them makes them decide it's probably time to go. So we're gonna walk now. We're essentially gonna be walking the path of the Union retreat and Hood's advance. And we'll talk about, as we walk, we'll talk about what happens, and then we'll go from there. So the Union soldiers who have advanced over this ground are now retreating across it. I suppose I should tell you, and I'm doing all this off the top of my head, so please forgive me, a little bit about the composition of Hood's division. It has 2 brigades. On the Confederate right, the Union left, coming across this part of the meadow, is the brigade of Evander Law, 2nd and 11th Mississippi, 4th Alabama, 6th North Carolina. Coming this way towards us is the famous Texas Brigade, which is actually only 3/5 Texas. 1st, 4th, 5th Texas, 18th Georgia, and Hampton's Legion of South Carolina. But they're the only Texas troops in the Army, so they're known as the Texas Brigade. Law's men come crashing into the brigade I mentioned earlier, commanded by Peter Lyle. They start to fall back and take off through the east woods there. At what's now that little tree clump, that tree clump obscures a rocky outcropping. And there's a monument there, and that monument is to the 90th Pennsylvania. It's a cool little monument. The 90th Pennsylvania there makes a stand and buys time, essentially, for everyone else to escape. Unfortunately, it costs the 90th half or more of its men. But they do slow Law's advance enough to allow the rest of their brigade to escape. So Law's men are coming this way. The 2nd and 6th Wisconsin, 2nd United States Sharpshooters, and the New York men I mentioned are falling back this way. If I'm a Union soldier, I'm moving a lot faster than this right now. The Texans are coming behind me. And that ground right there that you can see on screen is the famous cornfield. Some of Lyle's men go into the east woods, and some retreat back across the cornfield. And it is at this point that Hood's assault sort of splinters into several pieces. I'll tell you what those pieces are, and then we'll try and go over them. As I said, some Yankees flee into the east woods. One regiment from each brigade, the 4th Alabama from Law's and the 5th Texas from the Texas Brigade, peels off into the east woods after them, and they will spend the next hour or more engaging in what we might call Indian fighting. Fighting from behind trees and rock outcroppings, piles of wood. They hold up the Union advance and the reinforcements that eventually come through, hanging on by their fingernails. They are finally reinforced. Unfortunately, they're reinforced by a brigade that has taken heavy losses at South Mountain 3 days before this. Their commander was killed. They have just been assigned a lot of new draftees, and so it's not a very good reinforcement, and that brigade breaks almost immediately and takes off running. So the Texans and Alabamians eventually have to fall back out of the East Woods as well. That is, like I said, in a nutshell, in a few words, what happens to that part of Hood's assault. Law's other 3 regiments, like I said, 2nd and 11th Mississippi, 6th North Carolina, keep coming at it. Once they finally push the 90th Pennsylvania out of the way, they come in a sprint. By the way, this is a road, this is called Cornfield Avenue. This was not there at the time of the battle. It was put in by the War Department in the 1890s because they administered the embryonic Civil War battlefield parks sort of before the Department of the Interior took it over with the creation of the National Park Service. But Law's men come sprinting through the corn. They're roughly guiding on the wood line there, the edge of the East Woods. And they come across the corn and they run. Do you see that fence line? That's the northern part of the cornfield. Ironically enough, I don't know if it's irony, but right now the cornfield lies fallow. Most of the battlefield is still a working farm. They try to keep the cornfield planted in corn, but like all farmers, the battlefield is leased to have to practice crop rotation. And the cornfield is either fallow right now, or it looks like they might be planting a restorative crop. That field north of the cornfield that does have corn right now, at the time of the battle, that was just plowed. There was nothing growing in it. So you have to imagine that all that sea of corn you see up there was not there. But Law's men, like I said, guiding on the East Woods roughly, come storming across the cornfield to the fence line, and they run headlong into arriving Union reinforcements, Pennsylvanians under George Meade, who you might know would later command the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Gettysburg. He's a divisional commander at Antietam, in charge of a Pennsylvania division, and they get into a blazing firefight. The Pennsylvanians in the field where the corn is now, the North Carolinians and Mississippians along the fence line. Some of the Mississippians are so wrought up that they leap the fence and go charging into the field beyond to engage at an even closer range. And that is just a ripping, nasty, stand-up slugging match for a half hour. Eventually, Law's men probably do get the better of the Pennsylvanians. Unfortunately, they've taken horrifying losses. Their ammunition is running low, and Union reinforcements, heavy Union reinforcements, start to come through the East Woods right towards where they are. So they will eventually have to pull back. This mown path through the cornfield is what you're supposed to follow and stick to. Now, you can go wherever you want when there's nothing growing there, if you come here in the winter, fall, or before spring planting. But this mown path roughly follows the line of advance of the 1st Texas. The 1st Texas peels off from the rest of the Texas Brigade, who we'll talk about shortly. In General Hood's words, they slipped the bridle. If you read their commander's report, he said he knew as soon as they started forward, his men weren't going to be listening to any orders to halt or stop. They were just going to be driving straight ahead. And the 1st Texas follows roughly the axis of this mown path north through the cornfield, that part of the fence line. And we will deal with what happens to them last. What we're going to do now is talk about the last sort of segment that Hood's assault splinters into, the rest of the Texas Brigade. 4th Texas, Hampton's Legion from South Carolina, and 18th Georgia. Like I said, they come towards where you're looking now, from where you're looking now, towards where I'm standing, sweeping over that meadow. And when they reached the southern boundary of the cornfield, marked by this fence, which was not here, it was here, but it had mostly been torn down before and during the fighting, they are hit on their flank by Union soldiers. You can see the fences marking the Hagerstown Turnpike. Across that is an open field, and they are hit by Union soldiers. The other two regiments of the Iron Brigade, remember the 2nd and 6th Wisconsin, have retreated. 7th Wisconsin and 19th Indiana, backed up again by some different regiments, also of New Yorkers, are in the field across the Hagerstown Turnpike. And they hit this part of Hood's charging line in the flank. So what to do? Well, you have to engage them. So they make a right wheel. Hood's men are coming this way, like everyone else, north through the cornfield, hit in the flank off to my left right now, and they wheel to the right, and they come swinging around to engage the Union soldiers, 19th Indiana, 7th Wisconsin, and some others, shooting at them from the open field across the fence. This is roughly the line of advance of the 4th Texas. Now we are oriented west. They were charging north, they wheel to face west. 4th Texas on their left is right probably where that monument stands. And they come charging towards the fence, yelling and screaming and shooting. To the right is Hampton's Legion, and then a little farther up is the 18th Georgia. Now we're gonna walk to the turnpike fence so you can try and get a better idea of where the Union soldiers were. And this is all happening very fast. Hood's counterattack, like I might have mentioned, lasts no more than a half hour. But it's pretty much the most savage and concentrated and intense fury of any half hour of combat of the war. So, here we are at the Hagerstown Turnpike fence, and you can see the open field where the Union soldiers are. Now, when the Texans and Georgians and South Carolinians come at them, they're in that field shooting at them, they fall back. You see that tree line there? The edge of that tree line marks a rock ledge. And that ledge shelters both Union and Confederate soldiers multiple times during the day. You can't see it from here, but along that tree line is a rocky ledge, and it kind of dips down into the ground. It makes great cover. So they scurry behind that rock ledge and start shooting at Hood's men, his 3 regiments here, standing in the open on the brow of this little rise in the cornfield. We are probably nearing the rough position of Hampton's Legion. Like I said, of South Carolinians. Their Major Dingle, which is a wonderful name, as an aside. Major Dingle seizes the flag from the 3rd or 4th color bearer that has fallen under it, and he rushes to the turnpike fence and bellows, "Legion, follow your colors." And he gets to the fence and is shot dead. But the line or parts of the line do surge forward to the fence itself. The 19th Indiana and 7th Wisconsin, according to the 19th Indiana's colonel, become so wrought up and determined to win that the men demand to charge. And so they eventually do. They come up from behind the rock ledge and come across the field towards the Confederate position on the other side of the fence. And they maybe reach a point half to 2/3 of the way across the field and engage. But some of the bolder men rush forward to the fence, just as some of the bolder men On the Confederate side, where I'm standing, also rush forward to the fence, and in places you have men more or less standing across the fence line shooting at one another. It's an incredibly close-up, brutal slugging match. We're moving now towards the position of the 18th Georgia, and you can see, perhaps, I hope, cannons. There's a cannon there and a cannon back there. That marks, and forgive me if I'm not entirely on target with this, the sun is behind me and I'm trying to line the camera up with my eyes, but I can't, all I see in the camera right now is my own, on my screen is my own reflection. So I hope I'm filming everything I'm talking about correctly. That cannon represents Battery B, 4th United States Artillery, which is unlimbered here, and had originally been supporting the Union advance back to where we started. Now they find themselves in a whole heap of trouble with screaming angry rebels coming at them. So they switch to canister. Canister, if you don't know, is a cylinder filled with a golf ball size metal balls, and it essentially turns the cannon into a giant shotgun. It is the main anti-personnel weapon artillery of this era deploys to protect itself against charging infantry. But as you can, this is a very close range. To be honest, the line of battle here is probably farther back, but with the muskets of those era in skillful hands, it's not hard to pick off gunners at leisure. So many cannoneers fall that they have to force infantrymen into doing duty as cannoneers to keep the guns firing. The commander of the Iron Brigade, John Gibbon, his old army outfit, he is a regular lifelong soldier, was Battery B, 4th U.S. Artillery, firing here. So he's with them. And he sees that one of the guns are raised and lowered, the angle of fire, by an elevating screw. And one of the gun's elevating screw, the gun crew has carelessly let it run to the point that its canister discharges are flying high over everyone's head, not doing any damage. So he runs over, runs down the screw till it's pointing actually at the ground. The tactics manuals say that canister is best affected when it hits the ground and ricochets up into an opposing line, and gives the order to fire, and the canister rips into the turnpike fence. And I should probably say here that this is wider than the Hagerstown Turnpike was at the time of the battle. These fences would have been closer together. The canister goes off and splinters, just hurls multiple sections of both sides of the fence line right into the faces, probably of some of the 18th Georgia who had pressed forward to close to the fence, and carries a whole front rank away under flying wood and splinters and canister balls. The fighting here is extremely brutal. One of Battery B's shots, according to a thing, would cause parts of Confederate bodies to go 30 feet in the air and come back down. Well, as with usual in this part of the fighting, mutual extermination seems to be the goal. Neither side is willing to yield, and they are firing into each other's faces at a fantastically, horrifyingly close range. Eventually, however, with some things going on in the other part of the field, the Texans and Georgians and South Carolinians worry about being outflanked. They start to run low on ammunition. They've been firing so fast. Like I said, Law's men eventually fall back. And so they themselves have to fall back. And that is, like I said, a decent summary of the fighting in this part of the cornfield. Now I'm going to stop the video and walk over to the 1st Texas I told you about before, and we'll wrap up Hood's assault with the fate of the 1st Texas. All right, we're now roughly in the center of Miller's cornfield, moving north, following the axis of advance of the 1st Texas. Let's orient ourselves. That's west, that's the Hagerstown Turnpike. If you were here at the time we're talking about, you would see the 4th Texas, Hampton's Legion, 18th Georgia, in line near the fence, firing across the road at the Union soldiers over there. Over there, you would see Laws, 6th North Carolina, 2nd, 11th Mississippi, fighting the Pennsylvanians to their front. And now the 1st Texas, between the two, all alone. Like General Hood said that they slipped the bridle. The commander said they could not be restrained. So we're following the path of the attack of the 5th Texas. Just 226 of them currently in line of the 1,000 that left Texas. Maybe a year, not quite a year and a half before, but that's before disease and battle at Gaines's Mill and 2nd Bull Run in South Mountain took its toll. So you have one small Texas regiment charging with no one close on either flank, charging straight ahead through the trampled corn stalks of Mr. Miller's cornfield, across all the dead. This would just be carpeted in dead and wounded men. And what they're aiming for is, like I said, that field where the corn is now was just plowed. There was nothing planted in it at the time. As you can see, the elevation, it slopes up. And on that knoll is more than one Union battery of artillery. And they're shelling the 1st Texas as they come across the field. And the Texans are intent on driving off or capturing that battery. All their attention is focused on that as they come this way towards the northern fence, the fence at the northern boundary of the cornfield here. Unfortunately for them, what they don't know is that along that fence line is another brigade of Pennsylvanians of General Meade's division. You see, this whole field was blanketed in smoke. The powder that day was very smoky, the gunpowder. Artillery has been firing for over an hour now. Muskets have been firing for over an hour. There's not necessarily a huge breeze yet to blow any of that smoke away. And the Texans simply don't know, because of the smoke and their attention fixed on that little rise, that there is in fact a whole brigade of the enemy resting behind that fence, waiting in line for them. The Pennsylvanians behind that fence, however, can see the Texans because they are low. Obviously the Texans are standing up and moving. The Pennsylvanians are low to the ground. They can see under the smoke, and they can see the legs coming towards them. And when the 1st Texas reaches about this point, keep in mind, you can see the range, how close this is. The Union soldiers are behind that fence. When they reach about, let me zoom out so I don't make it seem too close, but this is where we are. When the Texans reach about this point, which is 30 yards or so from the Union line, the Pennsylvanians fire. And the 1st Texas just goes down in heaps and piles. Their flag is eventually lost during a truce the next day to bury the dead and care for the wounded. Some of the survivors see Union troops cavorting, waving their flag around essentially to taunt them. They ask, well, where did you get that flag? And the soldiers said, we pulled it out from under a pile of 4 or 5 dead men, which is probably how it was lost. It went down, it was covered, no one saw it. 8 color bearers, all in all, of the 1st Texas would fall in their advance across the field, in their where they run into Union musketry fire here. And of the 226 who started across Miller's cornfield, 83% of them are casualties, are killed or wounded. Most of them right here. Obviously, the 1st Texas, their whole advance They might stand for a few minutes frantically returning fire, but there's just not enough of them left, and they're stunned and reeling, and they eventually go back south. We can retreat just as fast as they can. The whole thing takes maybe 10 minutes. And I believe that, depending on the exact losses of the 26th North Carolina and Gettysburg, percentage-wise, I don't believe any Confederate regiment exceeded the 1st Texas's loss during the war. Although I'd have to look into that closer. That's the story. That's what's often said. I can't necessarily verify that that's true, but it was pretty bad nonetheless. So that is the story of Hood's counterattack in its various pieces. The whole thing, from start to finish, took maybe a half hour. And it's one of the more famous incidents of the battle. And I greatly appreciate you guys taking the time to learn a little bit about it with me. I hope it was clear and reasonably easy to follow. It's hard to communicate when you're not standing here, but thank you for your attention. All right, guys, a little bonus for you for sticking with me for that half hour. I'm standing here at the 90th Pennsylvania Monument. If you remembered early in the video, I said they had a cool little monument. I thought I'd come show you and tell you a little bit about it. It marks the approximate point where they made their stand to delay Hood's advance, to let everyone else get away. This rocky outcropping, this was very much here at the time of the battle. The trees were not quite so tall or so thick or so numerous. This is my favorite shady spot to take a break on this part of the field when I'm here. Recommend it. You could sit in the shade on a rock, catch your breath, cool down a little bit. Anyway, the monument. As you can see, it says, "Here fought the 90th Pennsylvania, recruited in Philadelphia, September 17th, 1862. A hot place." And it certainly was. And the monument is, this is frequently how soldiers would boil beef that was issued to them. They would take their muskets, tie them together at the top, hang a pot, light a fire beneath it. This monument was originally put up. The muskets were real muskets, and with a real pot. And they eventually, as muskets do, they're wood, exposed to the elements. They eventually decayed, and it was replaced by a bronze replica of the same thing. Now, the 90th has the coolest monuments. Most of them are marble shafts, sometimes topped by a soldier, or spires, or columns. The 90th did this. Very simple, just a hot place, very understated. And their monument at Gettysburg is also cool. If you're ever there, go see it. It's on Oak Ridge, and it depicts a lovely carved tree. Beautiful. And the cool thing about it is they kept that motif. At Gettysburg, there are flank markers, little stones that mark the left and right flank of a regiment where they fought. And most flank markers are just little marble stones. The 90ths are little tree stumps carved exactly the way that the big monument is. I don't know who was in charge of designing their monuments, but at both Antietam and Gettysburg, they did something different and neat. And I like that. I would like to know why. Probably look into that someday. In any case, that's the cool little monument of the 90th and their ambition to do artistic things with their monuments on the different fields. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you watching.